right. So, hopping off into the next episode here, we're going to be discussing how fibers, proteins, fats, carbohydrates all play a role in our human bodies. But some news I wanted to announce for this episode that I found from just some articles I was flipping through, and some headline not headlines, but just some excerpts from the studies really stood out. One of them was kind of funny. It pertains exactly to what we stand for. It goes, new studies are providing growing evidence for how mental training and mindset relate to athletic performance. And it was just an article discussing mental fatigue and the ability to tolerate mental fatigue, and if it's possible to train to improve that ability. And sure enough, they proved that it is possible. So it's just fun because I feel like we've all kind of adopted the mindset into what we are doing. Makes a big role, or makes a big difference at the effectiveness of what we're doing. So it's cool to see the science is catching up. Another one in that same category was 1 in 5 adults in the United States has a mental illness. That's like 45 million people. And they categorize these as AMI and SMI. So there's any mental illness and then serious mental illness. And then the article just goes on to training to improve mental functioning and reducing symptoms of either category. And it's a really good article. And then it actually even goes on further to discuss about how there's specific training modalities to combat neurodegenerative diseases. So like you'd integrate like some type of cognitive exercise along with training. So you might have them not at their max heart rate, obviously, but you might have them perform something while they also like step on a pad 1 through 5 in reverse order or something like that. Or you give them a mental task to complete while they're completing their physical task. I thought it was really interesting because Alzheimer's and Parkinson's is definitely really prevalent in this country, and a lot of people just view it, and even myself would view it as like, oh, someone has that, like, good luck. Here's just a matter of time. But no, there's things you can be doing to combat the effects. And then the last thing I found, this was pretty interesting, was $30 billion are spent annually on musculoskeletal injuries, and tendon ligament makes up about 50% of those costs. So I thought that was a fun little tidbit. You want to protect your tendons and ligaments and make sure you're doing yoga, getting massages, stuff like that. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have any news that you wanted to bring up or announce. This is our announcement time.
I don't have anything that stuck out to me today, but I do like the mental health one. That is interesting.
Like the 1 in 5 adults part, or the fact that you can train to combat
Well,
neurodegenerative diseases.
more the 1 in 5 adults. I mean, that's a pretty big statistic there, and that shows that we're not down a good path if 1 in 5 people are starting to pop up with these issues.
No, and what was scary too is that the largest group, they had them grouped out by age groups, and the largest mental illness category by age group was in the 18 to 25-year-olds. So
Really,
yeah. So we need to fix something. People want to look at vaccines or the way we do food, and probably all the above. Or get your kids off social media. It's just going to ruin their lives.
agreed.
Well, yeah, it's funny you mentioned social media. I was just like, the thing that popped in my head is like we have all this great technology of like wearables and things that are coming out, and I know Apple has gone, pretty deep into that whole health spectrum with the Apple Watch and trying to get more data to your phone and potentially like push stuff right to your doctor that could monitor you throughout the day. I'm just like, I still think that even though we have all this great data, that if you don't take actions on the advice or the nudges that your machines are giving you, it's going to be really hard for people to make any type of changes and change some of those stats that we're talking about. As good as technology is, it's still really hard to get people to actually do it and take action until they find something meaningful enough to motivate them to do that. So that's the biggest thing. Is I think we need more, not just technology and dumping all this money into that, but more money is put into like educating people on maybe motivation science or something along the lines of that.
Yeah, you make a good point because I think a lot of people look at those technologies to like take care of it for them and do it for them, and in
Right.
reality, it's just a tool to help you, but you still need to have that, like, you're talking about motivation. You still need to have that like kind of innate drive to want to better yourself or to want to do something. You
Right.
know, you might not know what it is, but once your technology piece tells you to go for a walk or whatever it may be, or you're getting feedback and you're realizing you're sitting too much, well, then you got to do the due diligence and um, do what you know you're supposed to do, basically, or whatever the
Yeah.
technology is helping you to do.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I think we can hop right in. This is going to be kind of an intricate episode. I don't want to lose anybody, and I do want to get scientific though, and talking about the way fibers, proteins, fats, carbohydrates interact in our system and play a role in our biochemical makeup. I think it's really important for people to understand that so that when they are eating or shopping or thinking about this stuff, it makes more sense because they can apply it to its actual function. Um, I think a big misstep is just like carbohydrates and sugars and glucose and simple carbs, complex carbs, and in the end, it's just all the same stuff. There's basically resistant starches like vegetables or sweet potatoes or rice, and then there's kind of, so I guess your simple carbohydrates like your breads, your pastas, and your fruits. So I think there's a good distinction to make there, and I think once people kind of understand how they play a role in their system, they might have a better motivation to um, make better choices. So that's the goal, and let's start with drum roll. Anybody? Does anyone have one they want to
I
start
never
with?
played the drums. Where do you want to start? Fat,
Well,
carb,
let's start with
the big one.
carbohydrates.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we'll probably spend the most time here. So I eat a carbohydrate, and a carbohydrate could be anything, right? Like I could be eating bread, I could be eating a donut, I could be having cereal, I could be having a piece of fruit, I could be having some pasta. Technically, potatoes, rice. These are still considered carbohydrates, but we will get into those a little bit later. We'll put a little asterisk next to white rice and a little asterisk next to sweet potatoes. But yeah, like break it down. I eat amylase is, I believe, the major enzyme to aid in digestion of carbohydrates, and it starts with our salivary glands, and the digestion process starts there and in our esophagus, and continues on into our stomach, where a lot of the simple sugars are broken down by our stomach acid, and then I'm out.
Absorbed in the intestine. So at the end product of any carbohydrate is glucose. Simple simple molecule of glucose that will be uptaked by cells throughout the body to be used for energy. Simple, fair.
Okay. Yep. Yep.
With that, all carbs are eventually going to be broken down into this simple complex. But the process of going through that breakdown and where the breakdown occurs and how fast it occurs is what gets people in trouble. I think a lot of times people get this notion that, yeah, he just said that all carbs break down to simple glucose, but every carb has a different effect, or I should say every molecule of carbohydrate. We're talking starches, simple sugars, resistant starches, all have different molecule makeups and all have a different effect on the body. So, for instance, most people will eat bread, which is high fructose corn syrup in most breads on the shelves in your supermarket, which is a completely different molecule and will have a completely different effect on your digestion, your brain, and how your brain perceives that molecule, and breaking down will have completely different than if you ate natural bread that was grown 300 years ago with simple sugar.
Okay. Okay. Um, and then, so where did it go? You said it went to your liver?
Yes.
Okay. And now what about, um, you talked about simple sugars. What about fructose makes that process different?
The process, well, we've talked about the glycolysis and the mitochondria. The process just happens to be that fructose is a different molecule, and it just takes a little bit longer to break that molecule down into a glucose. That's why you'll see a lot of fruits have fructose, but we all know that's bound to the fiber, which has a different effect. Your body has to go through different metabolic pathways or add different substrates. A lot of times cells will add a phosphate to trap that molecule and help break it down. So you're just basically you're adding different, whether it's another carbon to the chain, that your body has to take one extra step to break that down, which can slow down the process. That's why you have, table sugar, which is fructose and glucose. That combination makes it a really fast digesting and breaking down aspect once it's put into the gut system.
But fructose is harder for your body to digest, or just takes longer for your body to digest.
Yes, but
Yes. So
Is that correct?
yeah, let me if I could jump in. I think too,
Yeah.
if we look at like mainstream media, typically, and nutritionists will typically classify carbohydrates as simple or complex. And while we look at
Okay.
fructose, like fructose, which is generally a simple carbohydrate, um, we a lot of times mainstream media will associate simple carbohydrates as things that raise your blood sugar quickly, but in reality, like as Eric's saying, fructose actually is going to raise your blood glucose a lot slower than
Slower.
things.
Okay.
And then you also have some complex carbohydrates, things like starches, that especially if they're processed foods, are actually going to raise your blood sugar rapidly. So there is this kind of misnomer sometimes with classifying things as simple or complex carbohydrates, because not all simple carbohydrates will raise your blood glucose quickly, and not all complex carbohydrates are going to lower or raise your blood sugar a little bit slower. So I think
Right.
that, yeah, really, like, all in all, just the terminology has really very little value on determining the actual quality or nutritional quality, I guess, that's involved in those carbohydrates.
Yeah, I think the one reason why I bring this up is just because it's something I constantly hear in podcasts or reading things that you know, yeah, sugar is bad, but you shouldn't have the sugar in fruit because that's fructose. That's even worse sugar. And I guess what we're kind of getting at is the only reason it's really worse is, well, there's two things. Right? I did hear that it passes by a certain organ. It doesn't go to your pancreas. So it's processed right at your liver, I guess. And it doesn't have that, right, like you guys were saying, the insulin response. So I guess the negative there is that you can consume a lot more fructose and a lot more fruit before your body regulates its own blood sugar. Um, Like, is that like really the only negative to fructose? I mean, obviously the dose is in the poison, so you don't want to, you don't want to eat every single fruit in the grocery store. But I just feel like fructose
I think
gets
it gets
kind
a
of a
total
bad
bad rap,
rap
and
in general.
I don't think it's bad at all. Actually, it's part of this energy substrates that we need to survive in life. I think what makes it bad is people automatically assume fructose as high fructose corn syrup, which is a completely different molecule. Which, yes, you're still getting sugar from fruit and stuff, but to get the amount of sugar, from apples and pears, you'd have to eat 10 to 20 a day. I don't think that's going to really affect a lot of people. I don't think a lot of people are eating that much fruit. I think people are eating more processed foods, processed sugar, and drinking it, and that's where they're getting the fructose corn syrup, which is completely different. But I don't really think
Right.
fructose is that bad.
From
It can actually be better than glucose.
No, I don't think so either. I think, yeah, and I think it's if you're eating a piece of fruit, you're coupling it with a lot of antioxidants, and I guess the bad rap comes in like everything else. The poison is in the dose, so the bad rap comes when people are having fruit 365 days a year, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. So it's just like anything, you can overdo anything. I can literally drink this glass of water here. I could just keep drinking it and having it refilled and keep drinking it, and I could die. Not
Yeah.
directly from the water, but it would overdo something in my body, and I would dilute my electrolytes, and I would die from hyponatremia. So there's there's really every single thing on this planet. You can argue that it's bad for you, but I think what's important that we like to do is look at the pros and cons and weigh it out realistically. So if it's coming out of winter, so you guys should. I think fruit's fair game. It's nice to know how it breaks down in your body, and um, I think there's something to be said for having a banana or an apple versus having a piece of bread that you got off the shelf that's made with high fructose corn syrup. Or even having like a spoonful of table sugar, and you're way better off with the fruit.
Yeah, I think there's a great way for us to, as we kind of create a bridge from carbohydrates into the next, either macronutrient or micronutrient we're talking about here. But when we think about also the speed of the digestion we kind of talked about here, which is a big determining factor of how the body's blood glucose levels are going to spike or not, and the rate at which they're going to spike. That speed of
Mm.
digestion is not just determined by that carbohydrate, but what also you're consuming with the carbohydrate. So, how is the food prepared? How is it, like we talked about, an apple versus some apple juice, right? Or are you eating it with fats and protein as well at the same time? Sometimes those types of things are going to slow down that digestive process as well. And then one thing we've talked about in the past, which is the addition of fiber versus like drinking a glass of apple juice versus eating an apple. An apple contains that fiber, and fiber is that part of our body that is really important for gut health.
Yeah, that's perfect because we talked a little bit about resistant starches here and carbohydrates, and let's move on over to fiber. And that's what my little asterisks for white rice and sweet potato were
Mm.
was that they are essentially act as more resistant starches as a fiber, especially when you cook white rice and then cool it to room temperature. The way that this is all just a chemical reaction, right? Like, everybody remembers in high school when they told you, you know, uh, add acid to water just like you oughta, because if you add water to acid, it reacts completely different and it could blow up. Um, but so when you cook and cool rice, it becomes a resistant starch, and the more and more times that it goes through that process, the more fiber content that rice has. So white rice, fair game. Sweet potatoes, yes, there is a protein in it called a lectin that can be damaging to people's digestive system, but for the most part, they're easily broke down when you cook a sweet potato or pressure cook a sweet potato, and they too act as a resistant starch. And I think from what I've learned, aiding in digestion, we use resistant starches as a way to get better absorption of the good fats and good proteins into our system. So, when I say fair game sweet potato, fair game rice, I'm hoping that you're eating that with a bit large amount of vegetables. You're pouring, extra virgin olive oil on it, and you're getting some adequate protein, whether it be eggs or something else.
Yeah, Matt, another resisted starch we could throw in there, which is not as typical as you would think, but a lot of people probably have had this before. And let me ask you this. Um,
Jicama?
no, no, I'm going to go back to fruit for a second, and carbohydrates and glucose more specifically,
Is it a
and
green banana?
talk about a banana exactly. So
Yeah.
have you ever had an unripened banana before, or one that's not quite ripened yet, and then a banana that was over ripened, and can you taste the difference in the fibrous content within that banana, right? As that
Oh
banana
yeah.
ripens and over ripens, those sugars actually break down and become more digestible, and that those fibers break down, and so then you're actually getting a much faster spike of your blood glucose levels from eating an overripened banana. It tastes much more sugary versus that starchy unripened banana. And so that is just one example of, you know, which bananas essentially would be healthier for you. Probably the one that's not quite ripened yet. It does not taste as good for obvious reasons. Sugar is much more palatable. So, but that's just one example of fruit and fiber and banana, as opposed to like an apple, which is fructose. Banana is actually glucose, meaning the glucose, and we talked about fructose digesting a little bit slower. Glucose digests a lot faster in the system. So if you were to pick something to eat, know that a banana would
Yeah, that's why they say
digest
a lot of
quicker than an
times,
apple would because
like
of that type of
pre-workout or
sugar.
pre-competition, eating an apple won't be well for athletes because of the fructose and fiber content. Yeah, that's simple
They
choices.
say eat a banana. But they also eat regular bananas. I get Mike's point because I literally I don't buy bananas because when I do, I buy them green and I feel rushed to like eat them all within 2 days so that they don't ripen. And I got bored of like pre-peeling them, putting them in a Tupperware, putting
No,
them in the fridge because it's just I don't know. It's not as easy to peel a green banana. Have
no,
you ever tried to peel a whole
and they just don't
bunch
taste
of
as
green
good.
bananas at one time?
Yeah,
Well,
Mike knows what I'm talking about.
yeah.
They taste great. No, on the flip side, I do remember one time, like, I was on a budget, just like really cognizant of like not wasting food. And I remember this banana looked horrible, and I did not want to eat it. I wanted to throw it out, but I was like, all right, I'll just bring it with me for a pre-workout, and I ate it, and I swear I got like a minor inebriated from it. There's like a little bit of alcohol content
fermented.
in it. Yeah, it was fermented enough that I got like slight little head rush. Like, whoa,
Well,
this
have
is
you ever,
different.
Mike? I don't
So
know, Matt. Have you ever had people who eat a ripened banana? They're like, oh, that will kind of upset your stomach, or that will kind of give you issues.
Mm.
And I think a lot.
I've never heard anybody say that. Yeah,
I've
no.
heard of it. I mean, I always thought like growing up, my dad was like, "Don't eat a green banana. It's not good. It's not." I wonder if it's just the resistant starches or the complex carbs that are just like throwing your body for a loop. And if you're not ready to digest those and the gut bacteria, like you're going to produce a lot of side effects of gas or a little GI disruption. Um,
I think that's right. Yeah, I do think that's because it's such a uh, resistant starch that people's bodies are just not ready to handle that in the digestive
And
tract.
then
Yeah.
once you get accustomed to it, eating a lot of complex carbs and all that resistant starches, your body is going to be able to handle and break down basically the bacteria is going to break down those complex carbs and change them into short chain fatty acids and be
Well,
uptake by the body.
thinking about it this way, I'm thinking about it this way too, because right, those are carbs that I should say those are like that resistant starch is stuff that your body doesn't really digest, right? It just kind of
Correct.
basically flows through your system. Well, if you have leaky gut and you're putting something into your intestinal tract that potentially can get into your system, that your body can't digest anyway, that's probably going to wreak havoc on you internally and your bodily functions. So I can see that throwing your body for a whole crazy loop,
Absolutely.
if you do not have good intestinal integrity.
And a lot of them aren't a lot of those resistant starches. Some of them considered prebiotics, the non-digestible foods that help the gut bacteria. Basically, feed
Um,
gut bacteria.
yeah,
I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
like green
yeah,
bananas are really rich in prebiotics, and actually they say any raw
yeah.
vegetable is rich in prebiotics. I actually went through a period where I would eat a raw onion every week, and I remember my clients hated me because I would do it on Sunday, but like my breath would stink up until Friday. It was crazy, and I did it for like 2 weeks. I was like, all right, I can't do this
Just the
anymore.
taste there.
And there's no real there's I didn't notice any real benefits, just a lot of you know,
Well, at that point,
upset
I don't
clients.
taking like probiotics and prebiotics. If you're, I don't think a lot of people are going to feel a huge effect right off the bat, or like you take
No.
pre-workout and you
And
feel these
a big
effects. I
thing
think some
there.
people think that, taking prebiotics and probiotics is gonna like they're gonna feel a difference. Some people with like maybe Matt, I don't know if you've taken high doses and stuff like that. Some people with GI issues will notice a change, or if they're trying to just change their gut bacteria levels. But I don't. I've taken it and I've never really felt a difference.
No, because that's it's just another shitty way at manipulating scared people to buy products because you're going to put a product out there that does all these benefits and has all these great things to it, and you're going to say it has 1,000 or like whatever 10 billion CFUs,
It's a
but in the
lot,
bottom line and yeah, it's a lot, but the bottom line is you
right?
want variety. It doesn't matter how many you have of one strain. It
Right.
doesn't mean shit. There's like thousands of different species of known bacteria in our guts. So,
Or you'd have the people that
um,
they'll be like, "Oh, I take these prebiotics in the morning," and then you ask for what they have for breakfast. They'll be like, "Oh, I had a coffee and a sandwich wrap." You're like, "Well, what's the point of taking the prebiotic if you're just gonna fill your body with simple sugars and carbs? I mean, you're defeating the purpose. It doesn't give it's
yeah, yeah. I mean, I will say though that I do have like a gluten digest, and then I have a sugar digest, so that when I am like out and about, and like I know that I am going to be eating something with more sugar in it, or maybe it has gluten in it, I will pop those enzymes in. Um, but they're not
right.
probiotics; they're
Huge
enzymes, so they're
difference.
literally helping my body. Yeah, oh, for sure. They're literally helping my body break down that chemical from the start. And people miss out on the fact that like we only know about thousands of different types of species in our gut biome, but there's like tens of trillions of microorganisms living in our gut. So the best thing you can do, rather than try to pinpoint which ones you're missing and which ones you need to buy and which ones you need to take, is get a healthy variety of these resistant starches. Get a healthy variety of vegetables, quite frankly.
Yeah. Let's reel it back into our
Yeah,
we
I was
go.
actually going to ask. Sorry,
Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Go
No, go
ahead.
ahead, Matt. Go ahead.
Well, just gonna say, I'm glad you said reel it back in because I was gonna say, we talked about carbs, talked about kind of simple, complex, talked about resistant starches, and we were getting into fiber a little bit. I was hoping one of you could help explain kind of the difference between insoluble versus soluble fibers. Um, yeah,
Hmm,
anybody?
not my forte. I'll be the first to admit.
No, neither for me either.
I won't
And
speak out
quite
of
frankly,
line.
yeah. Like I never really thought there was much difference anyway. I just feel like you want a variety of both again, and I know that I think the insoluble fiber, because it doesn't break down in water, it adds to like the bulkiness of your stool. Um, and yeah, but I think you need a combination of both. I think that's the whole point of having a healthy diet,
Yeah.
is being a combination of soluble and insoluble fibers, which are again just found in different nuts or seeds or beans or vegetables and fruits.
Yeah.
So getting a good variety into your diet of things that you can eat. Um, all right, should we go into fats and we'll save proteins for the last
Let's do
one?
it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, who wants to start? I think the only fact I have about fats is that when we feed a cow, I love this fact, but when we feed a cow grass, the things it's supposed to be eating in the wild, um, it acts like an omega-3 fatty acid in our system. So when you get grass finished beef, is what I'm talking about, versus grass fed beef, which is still fed corn and soy and oats for the last 30 days before it's killed, or if you're not fed even grass, or if you're not even eating grass fed beef and it's just fed like that all its life, the way that its fat interacts in our body is now an omega 6 fatty acid. So it contributes to heart disease.
Yeah. And fat is pretty interesting. It's I feel like it's even more complex than sugar and glucose. I mean, you guys let me know what your opinion is on this, but like all the different categories of fat: saturated, monounsaturated, polyunsaturated, trans fat, and then even within those, there's like subcategories within those. Um, Most of them are good. Some are neutral fats. Um, as we know, trans fats and things like that are very bad. There's just so many different types and kinds, and I mean, in my opinion, they're just very complex
Yeah,
in
and
that
so
regard.
with them being so complex, they produce the most energy. I mean, they're a better source of energy
Mm.
than carbohydrates. I mean, hands down. I think
Isn't it four calories per gram of protein and 4 calories per gram of carbohydrates, and then nine
roughly, yeah.
calories per gram of
And then when
fat?
you when that goes through like fat metabolism, the amount of ATP produced is incomparable compared to glycolysis. The problem is it just takes a lot longer for that process to happen.
Yeah,
And I think it's important for people to understand that um, eating fat doesn't directly relate to your um,
body fat.
blood. Yeah, and your serum cholesterol levels. That was what I was gonna say.
Yeah,
But yeah, exactly.
well, so I would explain. I think again, I'll go back to like mainstream media and how they've painted it because I think this is very relevant to the listener because this is how they've heard it for so long, which is when you read a stat like you did, Matt, which is like fats are 9 calories per gram, proteins and carbs are only 4 calories per gram. We look at that and we say, well, you know, per calorie, like, I'm sorry, per grams or yeah, per calories per gram, proteins and carbohydrates are half. Or sorry, you need to double those to get the same amount of calories that fats are, right? Even more so.
Hmm.
So the logical thing for people to think of in their mind is like, well, I don't want to overeat too many calories. Fats contain the most amount of calories per gram. I should not eat so much fat because that would be bad.
Mm,
But here's the
yeah.
thing, right? Yeah, right, because that's the logical thing, right?
Right.
When we look at the numbers. But here's the thing: the way that proteins, carbohydrates, and fats work in your body, like from a biochemical standpoint, once they go in, is completely different. Like we just talked about, we could eat a lot of carbohydrates, right? And at only 4 calories per gram, your body will absorb them very quickly. They will use them as energy. You will feel hungry again very soon. When we eat 9 calories of fat, we cannot consume that much fat. Our body feels more satiated, it feels more full. We don't have to eat as many calories of fat as we would do carbohydrates to feel that satiated feeling. And therefore, we are also satisfied for much longer, meaning we actually eat less, even though fats contain more calories per gram. So we can't just say logically this is more calories per gram means that we should eat less fats because it's 9 versus 4 for protein and carbohydrates. We really have to take more of a we have to peel back, what's really on the surface here and see how is this actually affecting us once it goes into our system.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you're getting to a great point there too, because fat can be bad based upon what else you're consuming with it. And the basic building blocks for a fat are triglycerides. And your body will break down the fat into triglycerides and store it accordingly. So if you're eating a high carbohydrate diet and you're eating a lot of fats, well, your body's actually going to be more efficient in that process and say, well, let's take something that's closest form to our fuel burning substrate and let's use that and get it ready for, put it on the what do you call it, when there people are
On
waiting
deck.
to bat. Oh, come on, like runner up or whatever, like on deck. Yeah, let's put it on deck, get ready for use, and let's store the fats in storage essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So when you um it literally comes back to people say everything in moderation, and this is the only time that I would say moderation would kill you here, because you can either go one route and eat a lot of carbs, um, and no fat, right? If that's how you want to do it, and you won't store fats, but you'll be at risk for a lot of other health issues. Or you could eat very minimal carbohydrates and eating more resistant starches like we talked about today, vegetables and sweet potatoes and rice, and eat a lot of fat, and your body won't store fat, and your body will actually be better at burning different fuel substrates. And you'll have a myriad of other health benefits from having these benefiting triglycerides in your system and free fatty acids in your system. So um, it's interesting. I like that you bring it up about it's not about what you're eating. It's also about what you're eating and how it plays a role with everything else that you're eating and putting in your body. And one thing that's important to note is that there is medical evidence and articles out there that support um, a amino acid deficiency or a triglyceride deficiency, but there is nothing, not in any medical article, not in any medical journal, that says anything about a carbohydrate deficiency. We can make glucose from free-form fatty acids, and we can make glucose from proteins. So I think it's really fascinating when you look at our chemical makeup in that lens, and you start to realize like the American diet doesn't need to have the foundation of carbohydrates and wheats and grains. Like that just happened to be the most plentiful crop that they could produce and manufacture and sell. But really, we should be eating more along the lines of like what are those people called? The ketotarians, the people who just eat like fats and vegetables and not even really even meats. But hey, I'm not gonna bash meats.
I
But
think you said like our diet, because I know we looked last week at the blue zones, and in Italy they were still eating some carbohydrates, but I think you're outsourcing better sources of those kind of makeups of the carbohydrates. I mean, we're talking completely different, but I think where we, like you said, where we get in complete trouble is we just have an excess, and that's just wreaking havoc on our
yeah,
systems. And then with fat also gets a bad rap because technically if you're overweight, you're considered fat, which fat's, I've even heard like fat's kind of like the bad word, the wrong term for you know what's in our body, because I think people think fat, they automatically go, oh, that's bad, I'm going to gain weight, which it can be.
that's interesting.
Well,
Like
yeah,
we should
they've
call it
kind of
like
given that
blubber
like
or something different.
fat metabolism. We shouldn't fat. As soon as people hear fat, done. They don't care. But Yeah, which it can have a very
It's got a
bad thing
negative
because it
connotation,
can also
right?
be in an endocrine organ and send out signals that can really screw up our well, I screw up, but like enhance the way our body acts. It's one of these tissues that just stores a bunch of dense energy for when our body's like, hey, we need this. This is a mechanism that is brilliant to the human body 100 years ago, or if you're using it right. But now that we're abusing it, we're just seeing these systems just get literally just zapped to the ground. They're upregulating and they have no idea what's going on.
So you guys ready for this? I'll give you some numbers on actual numbers of calories that the body
Oh man,
stores in
bring it.
fat and in carbohydrates. So the yeah, this is really interesting, and it plays right into what we're talking about. So the average person stores about 2,500 calories of carbohydrates. So they can reserve those carbohydrates mostly in their liver and in their muscle tissue for when they need energy on demand, right? When they need immediate bursts of energy, say you're running to catch a bus or running away from a lion, whatever, or a dog. 2,500 calories of carbohydrates stored,
Or lion.
right, or a lion. Um, and for fat, the average person is going to store about 112,000 calories. So
Woo-hoo-hoo!
major difference. And this is, and this is
Yeah.
going by the average person having about 14 pounds of fat. Now, we talked about this, how fat has many more calories per gram, right? This is why 14 pounds of fat breaks down to about 112,000 calories of fat storage in the body. Now, think about that and tell yourself, do I really need
No.
carbohydrates if I'm able to reserve and store this much 112,000 calories of the most efficient fuel source that my body owns, right? Not the most immediate and powerful fuel source I have, but the most efficient fuel source.
Okay, but let's take that real quick and let's assume good intentions. Let's assume everybody wants to be healthy, right? Because everybody wants to be healthy. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that control out of their lap. They don't have that self control anymore. In the brain, you have think of Jabba the Hutt sitting there, and think of carbohydrates as dry kindling. And you got to keep this flame going in your brain to let the whole body burn and have fuel, right? And operate. And you start to run out of the dry kindling, and you look over and you have logs with bark on them that need to be processed to be burned as fuel, burned as kindling into the fire. And your fat Job of the Hut in the brain says, we'll be able to find more dry kindling at the corner store, at McDonald's, or we'll grab a soda, we'll grab a bar, we'll grab a piece of fruit, we'll grab a. There's just so many quick, easy ways to get glucose into the system that we've almost trained our bodies to send our signal for hunger and put things in our gullet versus let's use what we have in our system, because only when you force yourself or you force clients to go into a period where they can't consume anything does their body actually say, all right, fine, we'll start to burn all this extra stuff. Like, geez, you didn't have to say it. All you had to do is say it twice. Like, it's just crazy how it's like you literally have to twist your body's arm to get it to work accordingly. Otherwise, you're going to fall trapped to constantly consuming, and it's just all around us. It's really easy to be a non fat adaptive human.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if I can, before we jump into protein, because I know we're running down on time here, if there are just two things I can add about fats, which is I kind of alluded to in the beginning of trans fats being very unhealthy for our body. Stay away from vegetable oils and any of those oils that,
Mm.
anything other than, olive oil, coconut oil, things like that, because they are extremely inflammatory for your body. If you are battling some sort of disease or chronic disease or stomach issue or health issue, they're only going to create more inflammation in your body. So really stay away from those. And then the other thing I would just say is that your body's basically giving you warning signs when you're not getting enough fat. So we really should pay attention to that. Meaning, like if your skin is like getting dry, itchy, or flaky, or if your joints hurt or are stiff, these are usually indications that you're not getting enough omega-3 in your body. And omega-3 is basically the biggest portion of, so your brain is basically like made up of 60% fat. And omega-3 or DHA is essentially like the biggest part of your brain. So you need that in order to create like better synapses and communication within the cells of your brain. So it's really important that you get fat for that reason, for the cognitive reasons, for memory, for learning, for memory consolidation, and and any kind of depression and anxiety. A lot of times you'll find that people have very low fat in their diet, and then they increase their fat intake or they go on a ketogenic diet. And I'm not advocating a ketogenic diet for a long period of time or anything, but just adding more fat, you do see a lot of these symptoms improve. And this isn't just me saying it like because I've heard somebody else say it. This is in the literature. I've read it. You guys read a little bit of it. And there's a lot of people out there preaching it right now. So just pay attention to those symptoms. We talk about it all the time about the body always giving off clues and signals. So, dry, flaky skin, achy joints, definitely pay attention to that. Probably means your body can use a little bit more fat.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you giving that warning because it's scary how prevalent vegetable oils are in um, in every product that you could walk through the aisle in every grocery store and find something made with vegetable oil or just a bottle of vegetable oil. But yeah, you
Toxic.
don't want to be eating that type of fat. You want to be eating, like you're saying, good oils. Um, yeah, I guess we got 5 minutes to go into proteins. So um, let's let it rip. So for anyone who has any digestive issues, if you're going through a flare and you're still having symptoms, one key little tip is that most simple carbs are going to be processed in your stomach. They may not be the healthiest things for you, but you got to let your digestive system rest. And unfortunately, proteins, fats, carbohydrate, or fats, and anything that isn't like vegetables or simple carbs, simple sugars, are going to actually just cause more damage, and they're actually going to ride on each other. Like there's these molecules called LPSs, and they're short for little pieces of shit, but they're lipopolysaccharides, and they'll ride on healthy oils. They'll ride on virgin olive oil. They'll ride on coconut oil and get through the gut barrier and be a toxin in your rest of your system. So stay away from all that stuff if you're healing your gut and maybe you have symptoms for colitis or something like that. Stick with simple carbs until your digestive system heals. But let's go into proteins because that's why I brought that up, because proteins are broken down after the stomach and they break down into amino acids, get sucked through the intestinal wall, and then reconstructed. So, yeah, that's my only little tidbit of information there is that you can eat bone collagen all you want, but your body isn't going to make the priority to reassemble those amino acids into collagen on the other side. So there's going to be no real relation. You just want to make sure you're getting good amino acids, getting those good building blocks for proteins, and that doesn't necessarily need to come from meat 24/7.
Yeah, right. And I think people say protein, they think, oh, well, if you're going to have protein to build, muscle, it does build muscle, but it also builds what you're talking about: tendons, ligaments, all kinds of fibrous stuff. It helps our DNA replicate. When we're transcripting stuff through RNA, it's looking for these amino acids to put to the next strand. And the biggest thing that we see with these diseases is that these amino acids, not that they're not there, that they're just inefficient in the body. And I know we have essential amino acids that we need. We have ones that our body make, but to have that in our diet is very prevalent and really actually good. So when people say, oh, I got to cut out all kinds of protein, it's not going to happen, because there's protein in all kinds of plants too, because they are literally building blocks of life.
And I think another important factor here too is you can eat too much protein because your body can only take in so much at a time. I want to say it's somewhere in the 20 to 30 grams of protein in one dose. Outside of that, your body starts to there's an excess of like nitrogen that's in those amino acids that Eric was talking about, and I think that you get I should say you get an excess of the nitrogen, which can be a little bit damaging for your kidneys if you're on that high fat or I'm sorry high protein diet for too long of a time. So in spurts, yes, it's perfectly fine, but again, like you don't want to be just slamming high protein diet for a very long time. And then also, if we look to what we talked about in the last episode when it comes to blue zones, the big correlation we saw with all of these different things was they didn't eat a whole lot of animal protein at all. Most of them were highly plant based, and
Yeah,
we see a lot of the research and links to longevity show that a lot of these diets are much lower in protein. So I think you can say that the lower protein diet or just the minimum effective dose of protein probably correlates with a longer lifespan. So that's definitely something that I
for
think people
sure.
should really pay attention to. And then I really don't think that you need a whole lot of protein. I myself, I eat a lot more carbohydrates because I'm very active. Like I said, I do jujitsu like 3 times a week. I probably lift 2 or 3 times a week, and I'm physically active. My job is, as a personal trainer, I'm moving, I'm standing up and about, I'm lifting things, I'm moving around. So I'm burning tons of calories throughout the day. I could utilize a lot of carbohydrates which are efficient for me because I'm very active. Um, I don't necessarily need a lot of protein unless I really ramp up my weight training and I'm looking to put on muscle. I could maintain plenty of my muscle just with a moderate protein intake. So I think that you can overeat it, you can overdo protein. There is this misconception that if you want to pack on slabs of muscle, you got to eat a lot of it. I think more personally, it has to do with more of your calorie content than it has to do with the actual how much of it's coming from protein.
Oh, totally. Well, and that's why these.
Peter Attia just had an article he came out with that talked about a study that they discussed about how um, people on a
Hmm.
ketogenic
Right.
diet were not losing any muscle mass. So yeah,
Well, 'cause-
no, I think it's like a big myth. And then kind of like what you're saying before, like you can eat too much protein. Gluconeogenesis is where the process will convert protein
Right.
into glucose's storage form, and again store it
Turn it into fat
um,
eventually.
because yeah, it's not going to waste energy.
um, yeah.
Right,
I
exactly.
think if you're on a high protein diet, I mean, to use amino acids as an energy source is really inefficient, and the body has to go through a lot more steps than even you know burning of fat. So beta oxidation to even break these down, it kind of tells you the body doesn't even want to go and break these down, and that's where I think a lot of people get in trouble with these high protein diets is they're not seeing any benefit. I mean, the body's going to try to take what it in for calories that it can, and then it's going to try to break it down. And good luck trying to lift heavy weights
Right.
and perform on protein alone. It's not going to happen. And I think a lot of times people like Mike, you said, trying to put on muscle pounds, like if you get say enough protein, 1 gram per kilo, you're fine. These extra protein shakes that people have
Mm.
are, I'm not going to say a waste, but you're better off having some sort of carbohydrate shake if you want to kind of really replenish and gain and grow in
I
size. And I think
agree.
it's all
Yeah.
about, like you said, the calories. So I mean, proteins are really good, but when it comes to as a fuel source, they are maybe 5 to 15% utilized, and the body doesn't want to break them down.
But I think it's really important to address that and say that because I know that for me personally, when I was going through the stuff with colitis and going through even this industry and learning what I can and can't eat, it got to an overwhelming point where I was like, "Fuck!" And all I can eat is protein. Is that the only thing that's good for me? And that's not true at all. In fact, if you eat too much protein, you're making not only what we just said, but you're making a very acidic environment in your body, and that's going to be more
Yeah. Yeah. And
advantageous for disease and infection.
well, I was just saying, then Eric was
So I think
talking
it's really
about
important.
like
Sorry, go ahead.
shakes and things like that, but also protein bars, which are very um, probably very popular right now and have always been with a lot of the fitness enthusiasts and even the people who because you think, oh well, it's a protein bar, it's got to be healthy, but when we kind of look at that, a lot of the protein sources that are going into these protein bars are like soy protein isolates. It's a yeah, it's very
Yeah,
broken
they're like
down.
the
Yeah, it's a
shittiest
very
version,
broken down
and the
form of
fibers like
soy.
corn
Um,
fiber. Yeah,
yeah,
you bring up a really, really good point about how we talk about how fat is that negative connotation, but protein has the positive connotation. So you can
yeah.
sell things that are like protein bars, protein
Right.
shakes.
But
No one would ever
yet
buy a
some of the
fat
healthiest ones,
bar
and you
or a
guys
fat
probably
shake.
will back me up on this, is that, protein bars that are made with nuts are probably some of the best ones you can buy. And because they have the protein
Mm.
that's coming from a natural food source, and that's also, fat, usually that's like a fruit and nut bar, so it has a natural sugar, like fruit in it with the fiber, and so it's a much healthier form and a much more bioavailable form of protein and carbohydrates. I would always opt for the dried fruit nut bar
Yeah.
as the best choice, when it comes to, post workout or just wanting to get that little
Because
that
it's
snack
actually
in.
food.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actual food. It's coming from a real food source.
Um, all right. So takeaways, because we got 5 minutes left. I think the big takeaway for me is if you are adjusting your diet and you are exercising for longevity, then you should adopt more of a vegetarian type of diet. And that would include eggs for protein. I would even include maybe some fish and beef and chicken every now and then. Again, it's a similar to a vegetarian style. I'm not saying be a vegetarian or be a vegan, but I think people need to eat more vegetables, more above ground vegetables, and a larger a larger variety of vegetables. And yeah, that'd be my key takeaway point.
I'd agree for the longevity aspect of it, 100%. Like we said with the proteins, if you're looking, to put on, I'll come with the other aspect. If you're looking to put on some size, some muscle mass, you're going to have some proteins. It's a fair trade off, longevity for what you want now. Another thing is, just be mindful of what you're putting in, what's on the labels of food. Not just because it says whole grains on the front doesn't mean it's naturally whole grains. And I think people need to be completely aware of how the body breaks this stuff down and utilizes it. And it's not just the 100 calories on the back that put into this equation make the difference. It's how your body's going to utilize those calories and store them. Some calories are stored, some aren't. But I think people get a good takeaway of what they should be doing and possibly should be eating.
I like it,
Yeah.
Mike. What's your big takeaway?
I mean, I think kind of where I finished, which is when it comes to all the different ingredients that we look on these labels, and we talked about trans fats, we talked about fake sugars, we talked about, crappy protein sources, really just eating from whole foods as much as possible. Um, it's a much more, I would say, nothing that you buy that's wrapped in a package is in its natural state, of course. Um, but the least amount of ingredients that you can find in a product, like, especially products that don't have an ingredient label on them because they're actually the food, the whole food, always go for those. They're going to your body will actually use them properly. And I also I look at it this way. All of these macronutrients and things we talked about wrap wrap into calories, right? And calories is kind of like the big overarching theme when we look at all these macronutrients. So when we talk about eating whole foods versus eating these other processed types of, fats, proteins, carbohydrates, um, we we know that eating something in its whole food state is a lot less caloric. It's how should I say it? It's caloric um, restricted, I guess, and nutrient dense, if that makes sense, versus the alternate, which would be eating something processed, being very calorically dense but nutrient deprived. And so I think that's my biggest takeaway from all of this is um, it's harder to eat that way. The food isn't
Mm.
genetically manufactured, in a lab to taste as good, but it becomes palatable over time if you just get used to it. So that's it.
Cool. All right. Well, that wraps up this week's episode. Check out the survey in our show notes and stay tuned for more upcoming episodes. Take care.